Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Mastering the Drop, a real view of recovery, where we either have a very in-depth conversation about skill sets and tactics that you can use to be successful in your own life transformation journey, or we have the amazing opportunity to hear from other beloved people inside of our communities that have amazing stories of transformation, of growth, and are now stepping into helping others and nurturing those relationships and those recovery journeys as they are fitting for each person as they arrive. Anyway, but that was a mouthful. Today, my special guest is very near and dear to me. We are absolutely in a space of cultivating a great unified relationship in this space of helping people move from recovery and beyond, right? To play on the words that I see there behind you. But I've been on Matt's show, and Matt and I have had many conversations, and now Matt is here to share with you all what I know to be his journey and the impact that it's had in his life, because it is just an important message for everybody to hear. But Matt, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, because you do so much better at telling people who you are, what you do, and why you came here to share your story.
Awesome, Tricia. Thank you so much for having me on. And you're right, I loved your introduction. Absolutely, it was absolutely one of my favorite guests, that being you on my show, Beyond Recovery, as you mentioned. Just fantastic. It was one of those hour-long conversations that seemingly was 10 or 15 minutes. It really felt like we could have branched off into like a mini series of different topics. So, I really appreciated you coming on the show. And then, of course, me having the opportunity to come and tell my story on your show. It's just fantastic. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we all have a beginning, a middle, and where we are now, because there's never really an ending, I don't think. And I know that we all hope that even after our lives end, we leave a legacy behind that still will continue to impact people's lives. But, obviously we can get to that ending stuff later. Share with me where did it all start, right? Like, what did it look like, feel like for you when you got to this space of, something's got to change?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that setup there. I will start. I'm going to go back to, I want to say it was about the 5-year-old version of me. So 5-year-old Matt, my dad was and is a big drinker, and it was my Uncle Paul on my mom's side. And I just remember whenever they would get together, they'd be in the other room, and things would just start getting louder and louder. And I was very curious by that, because it was louder in what seemed to be a fun way. It wasn't like they were arguing or anything. And then I kept kind of wandering over to that room. I'm like, what? The music's getting turned up. They're yelling at each other, even though it's like even though it's like 2 p.m. So I'm curious, right? I'm a curious little guy. I'm still very curious. And I walked in there, and they're like, hey, Matt, come over here for a second, right? And then it's like, you hand me the beer. I do like the little sip of the beer and go, yeah, that's so gross. How can you drink that? And they start laughing, right? So that's like my first exposure to it. Just being like, okay, something is about what's going on in that room and what they're doing and what they're drinking. So that got in my head pretty early, right? So it wasn't like I was slamming beers at 5, but I definitely had an exposure to what that all meant.
Relate to that. Yeah, right? For sure.
Yeah, sure. So that's where it started, and just obviously the ancestral part of it. So my dad, heavy drinker, my dad's dad, same thing. Very lengthy lineage as far as we know, like the great grandfather and everybody on that side of the family, big drinkers, Irish background, very stoic. Anytime I look back at like old photos of them, they're very like, resting, the RBF, or resting bitch face.
Yeah.
Just kind of, everybody's just so like, you know what I mean? So like there was definitely a lot of that on my dad's side. My mom's side, more so like with my Uncle Paul, as I mentioned, definitely had some on that side. So definitely, on both sides, there was elements of that, but specifically on my dad's side. So, my parents divorced when I was 13, and I had a fairly sheltered upbringing up until that point. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I felt very betrayed by this idea that, I had this like wonderful family upbringing, and it was to me, when I was 13, I was old enough to realize like I'd been lied to. Like it was, I felt deceived by my parents. I was very disappointed in both of them. And heading into high school, like where I'm from is Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. It's about 70,000 people. So when I went to high school, it was grade 8 through 12. So I hadn't really hit a growth spurt or anything until I was about grade 10. So I was a very small kid, shy to begin with. Everything, all this like stuff, you know, this, my whole family system had been uprooted. So I didn't really have a comfort zone. You know, I didn't really have a sanctuary, so to speak. The house had very much changed. The dynamic of my family had very much changed. So yeah. And then I got bullied a bit. I was showing up to school and the small kid that's not talking to anybody. So I was like a prime target for bullying. So I was definitely exposed to that pretty early on. You know, and then so fast forward a couple years into high school, I got into music. I had been doing sports, but I felt that was very emotional during the sporting events. I had a hard time. I could practice, like in practice, it was all good when we were just having fun. But when the pressure was on of competition, I got very emotional. So, you know, whether that had anything to do with the divorce and everything else too, I was an emotional kid, right? So I found with music though, as soon as I pivoted into that, two things happened. First off, I found a way to be able to express myself in a more abstract way. You know what I mean? Like songwriting and even playing guitar. I could process these emotions that I was really having a hard time environment. So the guitar and my songwriting became very important for my, you know, dealing with or coping with different things that were happening in my life at the time, the divorce, the bullying, etc. And gave me a place to go. All of a sudden I had like musician friends. So I had a group that were like my group, you know. But having said that, you know, if you know anything about, you know, rock and roll and music, of course, that's synonymous with the rock and roll lifestyle, which I started glamorizing, you know, pretty early on. So by the time I was 16, that's when I really got into drinking every other weekend, right? And getting into marijuana use and reading like Led Zeppelin biographies and learning how cool it is to do drugs and drinking and tear apart a hotel room. Like this is what the life for me, right? I'm an angry teenager. This works out perfectly. Plus being a child of the 90s, you know, a lot of that music was pretty angry. Looking back on it, I have a hard time listening to it now. You know, like Rage Against the Machine was great for 18-year-old Matt, who was really angry at everything, but I'm not really there anymore. So aside from nostalgia, I tend to steer away from a lot of that music. So that was where it all started, right? That whole teenager thing with all that sort of stuff going on, the bullying, the not feeling like I belonged, right? I found that the drinking brought out of my shell, and I was like really tapped into the true version of me, right? I'm no longer shy. I can go talk to girls now, right? These types of things. That's what got in my head. So yeah, fast forward into my early 20s, I moved out on my own, and that's when the drinking, I started crossing a lot of boundaries, and that's when there was something in my head going, okay, you're saying this, that you're going to do this, but then you're just either ignoring it or pushing it aside. For example, I would do well, you know, I'm drinking a lot, so I will just make sure I drink after 6 p.m. when I get home from work. No drinking before that. And then as soon as I'd have a day off, I'd be drinking by like 10 a.m. or noon. And then my part of my head be like, what do you, like, you agreed to do it. It's like, wait till 6 p.m. And then my other side of my brain would be like, it's your day off. You've earned it. Right. So that's where I started becoming very aware that these like the angel devil on my shoulder type situation going on. Right. And yeah, you know, I think the first big wake up call I had is when I was about 27. I actually put myself in the hospital for 3 days with acute pancreatitis. So just like a really bad binge weekend, and ended up in the hospital and had to get like rehydrated with like 3 bags of IV fluid. And they didn't know what was wrong with me at first. And, you know, of course I didn't want to tell them exactly what I've been doing. I don't know what the need for me to like lie to doctors is. I get the impression that it's happened to a lot of different people, like shame or whatever it may have been. You know, and so when they finally did, up until then, I was like probably 12 hours or so of just the worst pain I've ever felt. And I thought I was going to die. Like I was doing the whole, please, if, you know, doing like the whole, if you let me, I'll learn my lesson, right? The bargaining, if I've learned my lesson, I'll never drink again, right? And then, you know, as soon as I got out of the hospital, again, getting back to the angel devil thing, the devil came out, you know, the addict side of my brain came out and was like, well, you know, that was a close call and you said you're never going to drink, but how about this? That was whiskey that did that to you. If you stick to like the clear alcohols like vodka, you should be fine. And aside from that, you've never really drank beer before. So, and nobody's ever had problems with beer. You can be a beer drinker now. And I was like, it's pretty logical. That way I can still drink and I won't ever put myself in the hospital again because I'll stick away from rye. So I think there's a lot of your listeners that I imagine have had these negotiations with themselves, these justifications and such, right? So that was a big turning point for me, right? On my way home from the hospital, walking home, I walked by several different liquor stores, and I think by the third one, I decided to go in. The negotiations had worked for the addict side of my brain. I grabbed a 6-pack of beer, and there we go. I was a beer drinker for the next few years. So, you know, I wish that rock bottom moment of like the hospital was like the one that took. It wasn't. So, like I say, another 3 years or so of beer drinking, heavy beer drinking, and then early 30s, I actually ended up having. Yeah, it's funny. Not funny might not be very curious that there's everything else in my life was leveling up. I kept getting promoted at work. My band just got like a $10,000 grant to record a professional album. And, you know, I had a wonderful relationship at the time with my girlfriend. I bought a house when I was like 23 years old. So all this stuff is like working out amazingly. But in behind the scenes, I'm just like doing a nosedive, right, with my substance use. And yeah, it finally caught up to me. I got very close to a DUI. I always look for like signs, like I'm very, you know, spiritual. So I had been getting a lot of taps on the shoulder, and it gave me a couple whacks in the back of the head. And there was one of these nights that I got pulled over, and I had a 6-pack with me, and I shouldn't have been driving. And I was literally coming out of a liquor store parking lot and just kind of shot across a couple lanes, and the cop car saw me and he pulled me over for like reckless driving, and he knew I left the liquor store. So I'm just like, oh man, here we go. Right. And I'm like, I was inebriated enough that there was a little bit of like, issue with the way I was speaking. So I'm like, if I have to even say one complete sentence, I'm done. And I didn't. The guy was just like, and he was super nice. And like, understand, he's like, hey, you shot out of there. You went across a couple lanes without your blinker. Just be more careful next time. Okay. I was like, okay. And then he walked away. And then I was like maybe 3 houses down from where I had to park. And I just was dead silent, held my breath, went inside. And then I was like, okay, this is it. Like, that was so close. And, you know, a couple of days later, something else happened to me that was it was just a relationship thing that just completely bottomed out. And I got super depressed. And so finally I was like, okay, this is it. This is the end of the line for me. I put up my hand. I said, you know, I need some help here, which was incredibly challenging for me to do.